The late afternoon sun was setting slowly, painting the streets in a warm golden shade. It was that time of day when people rushed home from work, while others strolled around looking for a little peace after a long day. Among them was a young girl named Maya. She had just finished school and decided to stop by the jewelry store where she often admired the sparkling items displayed in the window. Maya was dressed in her neat school uniform, her backpack hanging loosely over her shoulder. Her hair was tied up simply, and she carried herself with a calm and polite manner. She wasn't the type to make noise or disturb anyone. For her, visiting this store was not about buying something every time. Sometimes, she simply enjoyed looking at the new designs and dreaming about the day she might own something special. The jewelry store was located on a busy street, well known in the area for its shining displays and beautiful collection. The big glass doors reflected the sunset light as Maya pushed one open and stepped inside. The cool air from the air conditioner brushed her face and the sound of soft instrumental music played in the background. She smiled a little, her eyes moving straight toward the cases of rings and necklaces that glittered under the store lights. To Maya, jewelry wasn't just about fashion. It reminded her of her mother, who had passed away years ago. Her mother loved delicate jewelry, not because of its price, but because of the stories each piece carried. A ring could represent a promise. A necklace could hold memories. Maya often felt closer to her mother when she looked at these items. This was one of the reasons she liked coming here. As she leaned closer to the glass counter, admiring a silver bracelet with tiny charms, a man's voice broke the calm. "Can I help you with something?" It wasn't a warm or welcoming tone. It was sharp, almost suspicious. Maya looked up and saw one of the store clerks standing behind the counter. He was an older man, wearing a neat suit and a name badge on his chest. His eyes narrowed as he looked her up and down. "I'm just looking, thank you," Maya replied politely, keeping her voice soft. The man didn't smile. Instead, he frowned, his arms crossing tightly. He stayed behind the counter but continued watching her every move. Maya tried to ignore it and shifted her attention back to the bracelet, but she could feel his eyes following her. The once calming atmosphere of the store now felt heavy. Maya walked slowly to the next section of the display, where a row of rings sparkled under bright lights. She bent down to get a closer look. Before she could even admire them properly, the clerk stepped out from behind the counter and walked over to her. "You know," he said, his voice low but cold, "these items are not for playing around. They are very expensive. If you're not planning to buy anything, it's better not to touch." Maya's eyebrows raised in surprise. She hadn't even tried to touch the glass or ask for anything. She had simply looked. "I wasn't going to touch," she replied, her tone respectful but firm. "I was only looking." The clerk gave a short, dry laugh that didn't carry any kindness. "Looking? People who come here just to look usually don't belong in stores like this. These are not toys, young lady." Maya felt her cheeks grow warm. She wasn't someone who liked conflict, but she also knew she hadn't done anything wrong. She stayed quiet for a moment, hoping the man would lose interest and walk away. But instead he stayed close, almost hovering over her. A couple nearby noticed the interaction. They glanced at Maya, then at the clerk, their faces showing discomfort. They didn't say anything but quietly moved away, not wanting to get caught in the tension. Maya straightened her back, trying not to show that his words had hurt. She reminded herself that she had a right to be here just like anyone else. Still, the way he looked at her made her feel small, as if she had to prove she deserved to stand in this store. The clerk moved a little closer, lowering his voice. "You see those cameras up there?" he said, pointing to a black dome in the ceiling. "They record everything. If you're thinking of doing something wrong, you won't get away with it." Maya's mouth parted in shock. She blinked at him, unable to believe what he had just implied. "I'm not here to steal," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I was just looking at the jewelry. That's all." But the man didn't soften. His jaw tightened and he looked at her as if she had already done something wrong. "Well, people like you usually don't come in here to shop. That's all I'll say." The word stung deeply. Maya wanted to reply, to defend herself, but her throat felt heavy. She looked back at the glass case, trying to focus on the jewelry instead of the judgment in his tone. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack. She thought about leaving, just walking out to avoid more embarrassment. But another part of her, the braver part, didn't want to give him the satisfaction of chasing her away. She decided to take a few more steps inside toward another case near the far wall. As she moved, the clerk suddenly stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His face hardened and he said firmly, "I think it's time you left." Maya stopped, startled by his sudden movement. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Why? I didn't do anything." "You've been here long enough," he replied coldly. "This isn't a place for hanging around. If you're not going to buy, then leave." Maya's chest tightened. She felt every pair of eyes in the store turning toward her. Customers and other clerks were watching quietly, some pretending to browse but clearly curious about what was happening. She swallowed hard, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm not bothering anyone. I just wanted to look." But the clerk didn't back off. Instead, his voice grew louder, his hand gesturing toward the door. "You heard me. Out." For the first time, Maya felt a lump in her throat. She wasn't a child. She was old enough to stand up for herself. But in that moment, she felt small, cornered, and humiliated. Her heart pounded in her chest and she could feel tears beginning to well up in her eyes. She turned her head slightly, hoping no one would notice. The golden light outside had faded now, and the jewelry inside the store sparkled brighter than ever under the artificial lights. But to Maya, the store no longer looked magical. It felt like a place where she wasn't welcome, no matter how politely she behaved. She stood there frozen for a few seconds, unsure whether to leave or to push back against the man's harsh tone. Her body wanted to move, but her pride kept her still. She didn't want to walk out like she had done something wrong. And at that moment, right in the middle of the tension, the glass door of the store opened again. Someone else walked in. The cool evening breeze slipped inside as the door to the jewelry store opened. For a second, everyone's attention shifted to the entrance. Maya turned her head slightly, thankful for the distraction, even if only for a moment. She hoped maybe the clerk would leave her alone now that another customer had arrived. But the man didn't move away. His arms were still crossed, his body standing firmly in her path as though he was guarding something. His eyes carried the same suspicion, the same judgment. The person who had just entered was an elderly woman walking slowly with a cane. She smiled kindly at Maya as she stepped past her, but the smile faded when she noticed the clerk's expression. The woman hesitated, looked between them, then continued toward another display case. She didn't say anything, but her silence carried a weight. Maya could feel her throat tightening again. She wanted to hold her ground, to stand tall, but inside she was hurting. The clerk had no reason to treat her this way, and yet here she was, cornered in front of strangers, her dignity slowly slipping away. She adjusted the strap of her backpack and tried once more. "I'm not causing trouble," she said softly. "I was just looking at the jewelry. That's all." But the man's reply came sharp and firm. "Enough. I said leave." The words cut through the air, louder this time, and a few customers nearby turned to stare openly. Maya felt her cheeks burn hot. Her hands clenched at her sides as she tried to swallow her emotions. A small voice inside told her to walk out, to escape the humiliation, but another voice, louder, stronger, told her to stay. She hadn't done anything wrong. The clerk stepped closer, lowering his voice but making sure it was still heavy with warning. "Don't test me. I've been working here a long time. I know when someone doesn't belong." That last sentence pierced through her heart. It wasn't about jewelry anymore. It was about something deeper, something that made her feel invisible and unwanted. She stared at him, her eyes wide, unable to believe how quickly things had turned from calm to cruel. Maya glanced around the store, searching for help, for someone to speak up. She noticed two young employees at the far end, quietly whispering to each other but not stepping forward. Customers shifted uncomfortably, pretending to browse, but their glances kept flicking toward the tense scene near the display cases. Her chest rose and fell quickly as she tried to steady her breathing. She whispered almost to herself, "Why are you doing this?" "I didn't touch anything. I didn't do anything." The clerk's jaw tightened. "Don't play innocent. I've seen it before." Hanging around, pretending to look, waiting for the right moment. He leaned in closer, his voice sharp. "Not in my store." Before Maya could respond, his arm moved suddenly. He lifted his hand as if to shoo her away, but instead his palm brushed against her shoulder with unexpected force. The push wasn't enough to knock her down, but it was enough to jolt her backward, enough to make her stumble a step. A gasp escaped her lips. For a moment, everything around her went silent. She froze in shock, her hand instinctively gripping the strap of her bag tighter, Her eyes blinked rapidly as her mind tried to process what had just happened. The clerk straightened, his face stern, as though what he had done was justified. "I said leave," he repeated, his tone flat without a hint of regret. The soft music playing in the background felt strangely out of place now, like a calm song playing in the middle of a storm. Maya's heart raced. Her chest felt heavy and her vision blurred slightly as tears threatened to spill. The elderly woman with the cane turned her head quickly, her eyes wide with disbelief. A young man near the counter muttered something under his breath, shaking his head. A couple at the far side exchanged shocked glances. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had witnessed the way she was treated. Maya's lips trembled as she tried to form words, but no sound came out. Her pride begged her not to cry, not to give the man the satisfaction of seeing her break down. She blinked quickly, forcing the tears back, standing straighter even though her legs felt weak. She wanted to shout, to demand respect, to say something that would silence him, but all she managed to whisper was, "You had no right." The clerk smirked, his voice low and cold. "I have every right to protect this store. Now out." Her eyes dropped for a moment, staring at the polished floor, then rose again to meet his. In that silence, something shifted inside her. It wasn't just sadness anymore, it was a quiet strength, a voice inside telling her not to let this moment define her. She took a slow breath and held her ground. She didn't move toward the door, didn't give in. She stayed right where she was, her small frame carrying more power than she realized. And then, just as the air in the store grew heavier, the glass door opened again. The chime above it rang lightly, but the sound felt louder than usual. A tall figure stepped in, his presence immediately commanding attention. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She knew that walk. She knew that steady, confident stride. Relief washed over her as she realized who it was. The man paused at the entrance, his eyes scanning the room before locking onto Maya. He noticed the tension in her stance, the redness in her eyes, the way the clerk hovered too close. His expression darkened. "What's going on here?" his deep voice asked, cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. The clerk straightened quickly, surprise flashing across his face. He opened his mouth to reply but stopped, suddenly unsure. Customers turned to look, sensing something important was about to unfold. Maya's lips parted, and for the first time that evening, her voice carried strength. She turned toward the man at the entrance and said with shaky relief, "Dad." The clerk's eyes widened in shock. His head turned sharply, staring at her as though he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. The word hung in the air like a heavy weight. The man at the entrance, Maya's father, stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the clerk. His footsteps echoed against the polished floor, steady and firm. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The clerk swallowed hard, his earlier confidence fading fast. His mind raced as he tried to process the situation. The girl he had just mistreated, the one he had accused, humiliated, and even pushed, was the daughter of his boss. His face paled as realization struck him, and for the first time that evening, the power he thought he had slipped away completely. The store grew so quiet that even the soft music playing in the background seemed to fade away. All eyes were on the tall man who had just walked in. He wasn't a stranger to the store. In fact, he was the one who had built its reputation, the one whose name was written in gold letters above the entrance. He was the owner, and he was also Maya's father. Maya felt her chest loosen the moment she saw him. Relief mixed with her hurt feelings, and even though her voice had trembled when she called him Dad, there was a new strength inside her now. She wasn't alone anymore. Her father's eyes stayed fixed on the clerk, sharp and steady. He didn't rush his words. He didn't raise his voice. But the weight in his tone was heavy when he repeated, "What's going on here?" The clerk shifted uncomfortably. His face flushed, his lips parted, but the words wouldn't come out. A moment ago, he had been so confident, so sure of his authority. But now in front of his boss, his posture bent slightly and his shoulders sank. I was just," he stammered. She was acting suspicious." Maya's father's expression didn't change. His voice stayed calm but firm. "Suspicious." He looked down at Maya, then back at the clerk. "Suspicious enough to raise your voice? To embarrass her in front of customers? To put your hands on her?" The clerk's throat went dry. I didn't mean any harm." You thought what?" Maya's father asked, his words slicing through the man's excuses. The silence in the room deepened. A few customers shifted, their eyes glued to the unfolding scene. The elderly woman with the cane shook her head slightly, whispering something under her breath. The young couple near the counter leaned in closer to each other, whispering about what they had just witnessed. Maya stood quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. She still felt the sting of what had happened, but standing beside her father gave her courage. She didn't need to explain herself anymore. He had seen the truth in her eyes. Her father took a slow step closer to the clerk. "You've been here long enough to know how we treat people in this store. Have I ever taught you to judge a customer by the way they look? Have I ever told you to push someone out simply because you decided they don't belong?" The clerk's face turned pale. He lowered his eyes, but the silence that followed only made the weight of his actions heavier. Maya's father turned briefly to the customers, his voice rising just enough for them to hear. "This store was built on respect. Respect for every person who walks through those doors. If that is lost, then everything I worked for means nothing." His words carried a power that made the room feel smaller. People nodded subtly, agreeing with his stance. One man at the back whispered, "That's right," under his breath. Turning back to the clerk, Maya's father asked again, "Do you realize what you've done?" The clerk swallowed hard, trying to piece together an answer. It was a mistake. I misread the situation. I was only protecting the store." Maya's father's jaw tightened. "Protecting the store from who?" "From my daughter. She came in here after school in her uniform, simply looking at the displays. You didn't see her as a customer. You didn't even see her as a person. You saw her as a problem before she said a single word, and then you put your hands on her." The words hung heavy in the air. The clerk's lips trembled, his excuses fading as reality sank in. Maya shifted slightly, her eyes on the floor. She felt a swirl of emotions, hurt, anger, but also pride that her father was standing firmly by her side. He wasn't just defending her as his daughter. He was defending the principle that every person deserved dignity. The clerk tried one last time to save himself. "Sir, please, I didn't know she was your daughter." If I had known, that sentence was his biggest mistake. Maya's father's eyes narrowed, his voice suddenly sharper. "So you mean to say if she wasn't my daughter, your behavior would have been acceptable?" The clerk froze. His mouth hung open, but no words came out. He knew he had trapped himself. The customers in the store shook their heads, murmuring quietly to one another. They had heard it too. Maya's father leaned in slightly, his voice low but filled with authority. "Respect is not reserved for my family. Respect is for every person who walks into this store. If you cannot understand that, you don't belong here." The clerk's hands trembled slightly. His mind raced with panic. He wanted to beg, to explain, but deep down he knew there was no excuse that could erase what he had done. The truth was clear, and everyone had seen it. Maya's father turned to his daughter, his expression softening for the first time since he entered. "Go wait in the office, Maya," he said gently. "I'll handle this." Maya hesitated for a moment. She didn't want to leave him alone in the middle of this storm, but the tenderness in his tone reassured her. She nodded quietly, walking past the clerk without a glance, her small frame carrying a strength he hadn't expected. As she disappeared into the office, the atmosphere in the store shifted again. Customers began whispering more openly now, their eyes darting between the owner and the clerk. Some of them wore expressions of disappointment, others of respect for the owner's words. The clerk stood stiffly, his hands clasped in front of him, his pride slipping away more with each passing second. Maya's father straightened, his voice calm but final. "This store is not just about jewelry. It is about trust. It is about people walking in here and knowing they will be treated with dignity. Today you failed that standard." The clerk's lips parted, his voice weak. "Please, sir, don't—" But Maya's father raised his hand, silencing him. "Enough. Customers saw what happened. Staff saw what happened. You put your hands on someone who did nothing wrong. That cannot be undone with excuses. Go. We'll settle the rest later." The clerk's shoulders sagged. He looked around, desperate for support, but all he saw were disapproving stares. He slowly walked toward the back, his footsteps heavy, his head bowed. For the first time, he realized how small he felt in a place where he had once thought himself powerful. As the clerk disappeared from sight, Maya's father took a deep breath. He turned to the customers, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "I apologize for what you witnessed today. This is not who we are. This store belongs to all of you, to everyone who walks through those doors. and I will make sure what happened today never happens again." The customers responded with quiet nods, some even murmuring words of support. The elderly woman with the cane smiled softly, saying, "You did the right thing." Maya's father gave a small nod of gratitude before heading toward the office to check on his daughter. His steps were steady, but his heart was heavy. He knew this moment would stay with Maya for a long time, and as a father, it hurt him deeply that she had gone through it at all. Inside the office, Maya sat quietly on a chair, her backpack on her lap. When her father entered, she looked up at him, her eyes still shiny with unshed tears. He sat down beside her, his voice gentle now. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, Maya. You did nothing wrong, nothing." For a moment, Maya didn't say anything. Then she whispered, "I just wanted to look at the jewelry, Dad. That's all." Her father's heart ached, but he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And you had every right to. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. You belong here more than anyone else." Maya leaned into him slightly, her heart finally finding comfort in his words. And in that moment, the hurt began to heal, replaced by the quiet strength that came from knowing she was not alone. The storm in the store had passed, but its lesson remained. A lesson not just for the clerk, but for everyone who had witnessed the truth that evening. Respect is not optional. It is the foundation of every human connection. The office door closed softly behind Maya and her father, leaving the store in a tense silence. The customers whispered quietly among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others exchanging looks of surprise. The truth of what had happened was already clear to everyone, and no one could forget the image of the clerk standing over Maya with harsh words and a heavy hand. The clerk himself stood near the back of the store, unsure of what to do. He shifted nervously, his palms sweating, his once confident posture gone. Every second that passed felt like a heavy weight pressing down on him. He could still hear the owner's words echoing in his mind. "Respect is for every person who walks into this store." For the first time in years, he felt small and powerless in the very place he thought he controlled. He had believed his experience, his long hours behind the counter, gave him the authority to judge who belonged and who didn't. But in just a few minutes, his entire sense of power had crumbled. Maya's father reappeared from the office a few minutes later. His steps were calm, but his face was serious. He walked toward the center of the store where the clerk stood, waiting for what felt like his final judgment. The customers grew quiet again. Even those who had been whispering stopped mid-sentence, their eyes following every movement. The clerk cleared his throat nervously. "Sirs, I just want to explain. I made a mistake. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Maya's father stopped a few feet away from him. His voice was steady, not loud, but strong enough that every word carried through the room. "You didn't make one mistake. You made several. You judged a young girl before she spoke. You accused her without reason. You embarrassed her in front of others. And worst of all, you laid your hands on her." The clerk opened his mouth to argue, but the weight of the truth silenced him. He lowered his gaze, staring at the polished floor as though it could swallow him whole. "You thought you were protecting the store," the owner continued, "but you were destroying what this store stands for. Jewelry shines because of trust. Without respect, without fairness, the shine means nothing." A few customers nodded quietly. The elderly woman with the cane leaned slightly on the counter, her eyes never leaving the scene. A younger man whispered to his partner, "He's right. That girl did nothing wrong." The clerk shifted on his feet, desperation creeping into his voice. "Please, sir. I've worked here for years. I've always been loyal. Don't let one mistake erase everything I've done." Maya's father shook his head slowly. "Loyalty is not measured in years. It is measured in how you treat people when no one is watching. Today you showed your true measure." The clerk's chest tightened. His heart pounded as he realized there was no way out of this. Still, he tried one last time, his voice breaking slightly. "If I had known she was your daughter, I would have treated her differently." The room fell silent again. Customers exchanged glances, some whispering in disbelief. That one sentence revealed everything. Maya's father's expression hardened. "That is exactly the problem. You should treat every person with respect, whether they are my daughter or a stranger walking in off the street. You should never need to know someone's name or family to give them basic dignity. Respect is not a gift, it is the starting point." The clerk's shoulders slumped. He knew there was nothing else to say. The owner took a step closer, his voice calm but final. You cannot stay here. You cannot work in a place that requires kindness, patience, and fairness if you don't understand those values. Your time here ends today." The clerk's face turned pale. His lips trembled as he tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. Slowly he nodded, his eyes heavy with shame. He turned toward the back room, his footsteps dragging as he disappeared behind the curtain. The store felt lighter, as if the heavy air had finally lifted. Customers exhaled quietly, some nodding in approval. A woman near the entrance whispered, "That was the right thing to do." Another man added softly. Finally, someone stood up for what's right. Maya's father turned to the customers, his voice filled with sincerity. "I'm sorry for what you had to witness. This store is meant to be a place of welcome, not judgment. I promise you this will not happen again." A small ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. Some customers smiled at him. Others gave subtle nods of support. The elderly woman spoke up gently. "It takes courage to do what you just did. Many wouldn't. You've reminded us all what matters more than money: respect." Her words warmed the room, and a few others echoed her sentiment. The customers who had been unsettled now felt reassured. Their trust in the store strengthened rather than broken. Maya's father gave a small nod of gratitude before returning to the office once more. Inside, Maya sat quietly, her hands folded on her lap. When she saw him, her eyes searched his face for answers. "It's done," he said softly, sitting beside her. "He won't work here anymore." Maya let out a slow breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She looked down at her lap, then back at her father. "Did everyone see?" she asked, her voice small. "Yes," he replied gently. "They saw what happened, and they also saw that it was wrong. You don't need to carry the shame, Maya. The only shame today belongs to the man who treated you unfairly." Her eyes glistened, but this time not from pain. It was relief, mixed with pride that her father had stood so firmly for her. "I didn't want to cry," she admitted softly. "I wanted to be strong." He smiled, placing a hand over hers. "You were strong. Standing there, not running away, even when it was hard, that was strength. Never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. You belong here more than anyone else." For a while they sat in silence, the soft hum of the store outside filling the quiet. Then Maya leaned gently against her father's shoulder, her heart lighter than it had been all evening. In the main store, the atmosphere began to return to normal. Customers browsed again, though the story of what they had witnessed would stay with them. Some even felt more connected to the store now, knowing the owner valued respect above profit. A young man at the counter whispered to his partner, "I'll come back here again. Not many places take a stand like that." The elderly woman with the cane smiled softly to herself, touched by what she had seen. To her, the jewelry had always been beautiful, but now she knew the store's values were even more precious. Meanwhile, the clerk sat alone in the back room, his head in his hands. For the first time, he truly felt the weight of his actions. He thought about how quickly everything had fallen apart, how his pride, his assumptions, and his harsh words had led to this moment. But outside, in the brighter part of the store, Maya and her father were beginning to heal. What had started as a painful experience was slowly turning into a lesson, not only for them but for everyone who had been there. The jewelry still sparkled in its glass cases, but now it seemed to shine differently. It wasn't just about the glitter of gold or the sparkle of diamonds. It was about something far greater, the reminder that every person carries their own worth and that worth deserves to be honored. The night outside had deepened, and the jewelry store lights glowed brighter against the dark streets. Inside, the air slowly began to settle, though the memory of what had happened still lingered in every corner. The soft background music played, once again, and customers moved quietly, as though they were still digesting the events they had just witnessed. In the office, Maya sat with her father, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. The weight she had carried since stepping into the store was finally starting to lift. Her father's steady presence gave her comfort, and his words replayed, in her mind like a soft melody. "You belong here more than anyone else." For the first time that evening, Maya smiled faintly. It wasn't a smile of joy, but one of quiet strength, the kind that grows after facing something painful and realizing you survived it. Her father noticed. He placed a hand on her back, rubbing gently. "Are you feeling a little better now?" he asked softly. Maya nodded. Yes, it still hurts, but not the same way anymore. That's normal, he said. Sometimes people's words and actions leave marks, but they don't have to define us. What matters is how we respond. Today you stood strong even when it was hard. I am proud of you. Maya's eyes glistened, but this time it wasn't from sadness. Thank you, Dad, she whispered. There was a light knock at the office door. One of the younger employees stepped in, her hands folded nervously. Sir, she said, some of the customers asked if they could speak with you before they leave. Her father glanced at Maya, as though asking if she was ready to step outside again. Maya hesitated, but then she straightened her back and gave a small nod. She didn't want to hide away. She wanted to face the world with dignity, just as her father had taught her. Together, they walked back into the main store. The customers turned toward them, their expressions soft, supportive. The elderly woman with the cane was the first to speak. Young lady, she said kindly, looking at Maya, you showed great courage tonight. Don't ever forget that. Maya managed a shy smile, her cheeks warming. Thank you, she replied quietly. Another customer, a man in a business suit, added, Your father did the right thing. People like us customers, we come back not just for jewelry, but for how we're treated. Today, he proved this place is worth trusting. Several others murmured in agreement. One woman even stepped forward, patting Maya gently on the shoulder. You keep your head high, sweetheart. Don't let anyone make you feel small. The kindness in their words felt like a soothing balm over the wounds she had carried just an hour earlier. For Maya, it was proof that not everyone judged unfairly, and that goodness still outweighed cruelty. Her father spoke then, addressing everyone in the store. I want to thank you all for your patience tonight. What happened here was unacceptable, and it will never happen again. This store is built on respect, and respect will always come first. I appreciate you for standing by us. The customers nodded, some smiling warmly before slowly making their way out, carrying not only the memory of glittering jewelry, but also the story of what they had witnessed, a story they would no doubt share with others. When the store finally grew quiet again, Maya sat with her father behind the counter. The night felt different now. The store still sparkled, but its shine carried a new meaning. Maya looked up at him and asked softly, Do you think people will remember what happened today? Yes, he said simply, and that's a good thing. Sometimes people need to see that standing up for what's right is just as important as selling something. Tonight wasn't about jewelry, it was about dignity. And that lesson will stay with everyone who was here. Maya thought about that for a moment, then nodded slowly. I don't think I'll ever forget it either. Her father gave a small smile. And you shouldn't, because one day, when you face something difficult again, and life will always test us, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember that you have the strength to stand tall no matter what. The words settled in her heart like a seed, one that would grow stronger over time. Later that evening, after the last customer had left and the doors were locked, Maya and her father walked out together. The night air was cool against their skin, carrying with it the quiet hum of the city. Streetlights glowed, and the sound of passing cars filled the silence between them. Maya's father looked at her as they walked. Do you want to know something? He asked. She glanced up at him. What? When I was younger, I faced moments like this too. People looked at me and decided who I was before I even spoke. It hurt, but I promised myself that when I built this store, no one would ever feel that way here. Tonight I failed you in that promise because someone under my roof made you feel exactly what I swore to fight against. And for that, I'm truly sorry. Maya's steps slowed as she listened. Her eyes softened. But you didn't fail, Dad. You stopped it. You stood up for me. You showed everyone that respect matters. That's not failing. Her father stopped walking, staring at her for a moment with deep pride. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. You're wiser than you know, Maya, and stronger too. She smiled faintly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time that day, she didn't just feel like the girl who had been wronged. She felt like the girl who had overcome, the girl who had been reminded of her worth. As they reached their car, Maya looked back at the store. Its golden letters gleamed under the streetlight, a reminder of the place where the painful moment had happened, but also where the lesson had been learned. She realized then that the memory of this day would never fade, but it wouldn't always sting. In time, it would serve as a reminder of resilience, of dignity, and of the unshakable bond between her and her father. Days later, the story of that evening spread quietly through the community. Customers who had been there shared it with friends, and word reached even those who hadn't stepped foot in the store. People spoke about the owner who chose respect over profit, the young girl who stood strong in the face of humiliation, and the reminder that dignity is priceless. Far from damaging the store's reputation, the incident strengthened it. More, people began visiting, some even saying openly, "We came because we heard what happened. We wanted to see the place where respect matters more than anything." Maya noticed the difference. Whenever she visited the store with her father afterward, she saw more smiles, more warmth, and a deeper sense of trust from the customers. It made her realize that sometimes painful experiences can create something good, something lasting. And as for the clerk, he faded quietly into the past. His actions had cost him not just a job, but the respect of everyone who had witnessed his choices. For him, it was a lesson learned too late, a reminder that pride and prejudice can destroy everything in a single moment. For Maya, though, the story was different. She carried the memory not as a scar, but as a badge of strength. She knew she had faced judgment and mistreatment, yet she had walked through it with her head held high. Most importantly, she knew she had a father who would always stand beside her no matter the storm. That night, as she lay in bed, Maya replayed the events in her mind. The sting of the clerk's words and actions still echoed faintly, but stronger. Then that was the sound of her father's voice, calm and steady, saying, "Respect is not a gift, it is the starting point." With that thought, she closed her eyes, her heart steady, her spirit stronger than before. Because in the end, the story wasn't just about a jewelry store or a clerk who made a mistake. It was about something much bigger, the unshakable truth that every human being deserves dignity, and the courage it takes to defend that truth when it's tested.